By the way, did you know anybody personally who wound up getting convicted, or in your career who wound up being on the wrong side of the law?
Yeah. They had a physical identification of him. They had photos of him in the one location. Then when you have another case pop up in another location, and we're all, and case agents talk, confer, it all goes through FBI headquarters. My job is to recruit confident human sources and intelligence officers from a foreign country. Manipulation, as I call the hooky spooky spy stuff, it works in the short term for the transactional relationship. But if you're going to go for the long-term intelligence, it's going to fail, guaranteed. I know it fails because I've done it. I did it for 22 years. I know what works and doesn't work.
All right, we are joined again by Robin Dreeke, who is the former, is it chief or director of the Counterintelligence Behavioral Analysis Program at the FBI?
So I'll give you the title as it's titled, but I've translated it for consumers. I call myself the former chief of the FBI Counterintelligence Behavioral Analysis Program. Inside the Bureau, it's called program manager of the program. It's a technical thing, but people outside the FBI don't understand the word program manager. But it's easy to say chief or head. I was the head of the program for a good part of my career. I was on the team as a team member I think I came on the team late 2001 to 2002. And I was on the team because our team ran a little bit differently than the rest of the behavioral analysis units in the Bureau. The vast majority, matter of fact, the entire team of my team was an adjunct job we had, as well as full-time case agents working operations. So I was a team member for most of my career from 2000, as I came in the Bureau in 1997, got on the team in late 2001, 2002, and I was on the team until the day I retired, and I ran the team for about 5 years, 3 years, something like that, towards the end of my career.
Awesome. Well, I brought you on today because, ironically, I interviewed another guest, Lena Cisco, who we both know I've interviewed multiple times. And Lena has a new book out. So here's a quick plug for the 13 Power Moves of Dark Psychology. This is her book. But what stood out for me was you wrote a foreword in this book. And in the foreword, you told a tale of somebody who was being investigated either by the FBI or the CIA. You'll fill in the details. But I was fascinated about the story because Frank Abagnale, a very famous con man, who, by the way, folks, his entire story is a con itself, but that's another show which I've covered in the timeline you may want to check out. But I was very intrigued, got in touch with you, and found out that you noticed a few of these particular cases when you were in. And today's subject is CIA deep cover officers who went bad. So let's start off with the first one that you wrote about in the forward. And I do understand you can't give me real names, things like that. So I don't know, you can give a fake name if you can be consistent, or whatever it is, just so everybody knows we're not identifying anybody due to the fact that Robin has to get cleared by the FBI for anything he does publicly.
You bet, Eric. And so, yeah, everything I write is been through pre-publication review, because a lot of people ask, Robin, you got 4 books, and so how do you write all these stories? I have to fictionalize, shift things around, so it becomes a bundled jumble in my head sometimes. But this was an interesting case that I had seen. Let me back up and give a little bit of premise for what we did and what I was doing on the team and how this case came to be that I wrote about, and I included Lena's forward. So when I ran the behavioral analysis program for the Bureau for Counterintelligence, I roughly did, we as a team, about 100, a little bit more behavioral assessments a year. And those behavioral assessments were for cases all over the country. We would typically get a request from a case agent in a field office anywhere in the country. Sometimes they involved overseas, but most of the time it's all domestic. And it was a case agent that hit a stumbling block or was a little bit challenged with how to move forward, either with a subject interview, a double agent operation, an interview and interrogation, an espionage investigation, all what I call the hooky spooky spy stuff. A lot of times it was, how do I get management to sign off on this? So we actually assessed how to get yes from our bosses to say yes to righteous operations. I'm not shitting you. This is the way life rolls, right? Because it's all human behavior. And so doing those a couple hundred times a year or 100 times plus a year, you see a lot. And at the time, a vast majority of operations we did were recruitment operations, because part of the Bureau's mandate is recruit sources, confidential human sources, to fill intelligence gaps as a country, as a nation. Also, part of that is recruit spies. The intelligence officers from China, Russia, and all the other nefarious countries that don't have our best interests at heart. Our job is to recruit those spies to make them work for us. And also espionage investigations. At the time, we covered, when I took over the team, we were doing about 15% of our behavioral assessments were espionage investigations. By the time I left the team, they were up to about 33%. So we had a rise in espionage investigations, because espionage investigations are criminal investigations, and counterintelligence operations, recruitment operations are not criminal investigations. They are intelligence operations. So the two worlds mesh. Sorry to
Just
get
so I
into the
just so I understand, and on a very high level, part of your job is to recruit intelligence officials in other countries
Mhm.
to give you information.
Yep.
And the other part of your job is finding those intelligence officials or law enforcement or other officials within our own government who were recruited by your counterparts in other countries. Would that be fair?
Yes, we covered both. We want to recruit, because the best way to find someone that has gone bad and gone to the bad guys is have one of the bad guys themselves tell us who went bad. So,
Mm.
so one of the first things you do when you actually get an intelligence officer on board and cooperating with you is ask them, what do we need to know that we don't know that is a critical vulnerability of ours? And so that question spurs up, hey, you don't know it, but you actually have a leak right here, that you need to investigate, which is very, very risky for the intelligence officer, because if we have a leak, they could be compromised. And so it was always
One
this tough
question though.
dance. Yeah, go ahead.
Have you ever been manipulated by the other part? Like, for example, and maybe I'm just thinking too goofy movie style or high level, but you come recruiting me, I'm in another country, and I do happen to know different people, but they're straight up. They're not really a double agent or anything, but they're effective. So I tell you that Joe Smith, Joe Smith, he works for us. Even though Joe Smith doesn't work for us. Is that something that could be potentially a problem or something that you watch out for?
Yes, that can definitely be a problem. So if that happens, I don't know of a case where that actually has happened, where someone was accused of spying for the bad guys, where it was implanted information by the person we had recruited to do just that. But that is a possibility. So there's two things we do. One, the vetting of the recruitment we have, the spy that we have on board is really extensive. Um, the Because someone who's actually a real spy that is actually 100% on board with us is not going to play games with us like that. They just don't do that, because it's not in their best interest to do that, because they're going to compromise what they're hoping to get out of our relationship, which is either resettlement in the States, education for their kids, safety and prosperity for themselves and those they care about. By feeding us false information intentionally or even unintentionally, will have dire consequences to that probability of them getting what they hope to get out of this relationship. So that's why a real individual is not going to do that intentionally. So, but say that they did give up information and it's not actually accurate. What we do inside the Bureau, when it came to, and we called them 65 investigations, because that's the designator we had for espionage, both whether it's foreign, like a foreigner that's committing espionage or a U.S. person committing espionage, we handle those are the most delicate cases we do on the face of the planet, because the potential repercussions, if we're wrong or they're innocent, are life changing for the individual. That's why they're so close held. They're so compartmentalized, because if they're innocent and they've been accused, no one can ever know that they've been investigated, because it could ruin them. It
Could
ruins
it
them.
also, in fairness, can it also embarrass the agencies, and that's another reason that you may not want to splash all over the place that, oh, look at what they were doing here. Boy,
That's a great question. I would say it's an embarrassment for the agency, but at our granular level, I didn't think about embarrassment at agency. In order to be effective in our job, in my job, as you know, from our relationship and how I interact with people, you had to have deep, deep active empathy with people. Doesn't mean you like them necessarily, but you had to understand them. So everything I ever did with every investigation I did or operation I did was I always deeply thought about the individual that I'm going to be interacting with or need to interact with and the impact of all this on them. So yeah, it could have an impact on the bureau. That's not my job to care about. My job is care about this individual that I need to interact with and the impact it's going to have on them. Because I've seen disasters. I knew of disasters. As an example, when Earl Pitts, when we didn't know who Earl Pitts was, and because
who is Earl Pitts?
Earl Pitts was, so Robert Hansen.
Oh, yeah.
He's the big spy. So before Robert Hansen inside the bureau, we had a guy by the name of Earl Pitts, and he had gone to the Russians. I'll call him Hansen Light,
Okay.
but he volunteered to the Russians in New York. And he was doing their bidding. We did a false flag investigation against him, and we got him because we had a recruitment that told us we had a problem in New York. And what was interesting at the time was we had the description of Earl Pitts. We didn't know exactly who he was. All we had was some physical attributes of him, and there was another bureau employee that worked counterintelligence that actually had similar physical attributes that we had an investigation on. And it had to be extremely close held just in case we're wrong. And we were wrong. And so that's why we are very, very careful, extremely cautious with how we do those types of investigations, because hey, it's not just innocent to proven guilty. You don't want to ruin lives along the way as well. I mean, so
like Richard Jewell, I guess, would be an example.
Yeah, that's a great example. I know the polygraph examiner that did it. I actually know him. He was the polygraph examiner in New York. But Richard Jewell is a great example of, so here's someone that's being accused of something, ultimately found innocent, and his life is destroyed, all because of an unrighteous investigation and early leakage where people love jumping to conclusions without data. So yeah, it's a great example.
Wow. Okay.
Lot to unpack there. Sorry.
No. That's fine. By the way, did you know anybody personally who wound up getting convicted or in your career who wound up being on the wrong side of the law?
Yeah. I've erased his name. So the FBI official that was in New York that was he volunteering to the Georgian or Albanians, and he went to Moscow. Not Moscow. He went to London to meet his handler. Oh, what the hell was his name? That was only the last couple of years. Oh, he was an SAC in New York. I can't believe I'm blanking on his name. But yeah, I knew him. I knew him in New York as a case agent, and he wound up going bad. And I think he did a plea deal. And so I don't think he's doing jail time, or he's doing limited jail time. But yeah, interesting
Amazing.
case. I can't believe.
Tell me about it. Tell me about it without going into it. Well, I'll pop the name in and get.
Yeah, you'll be able to find it, because it actually. I mean, I wasn't part of the investigation. I just knew him as another case agent, because he was on a Russian squad in New York. So in New York, we had multiple Russian squads, and he was on another one at the time that I was there. And he rose up through the ranks. He became a senior executive in the bureau. And he was utilizing his position to try to hide in plain sight. And as he was getting ready for his retirement, he made some connections and some shady deals, and was taking some kickbacks from foreign governments. Yeah, bad shit. Yeah. What? I can't believe I'm blanking on his name.
And he was a special agent in charge.
Oh yeah, he was probably the highest ranking senior executive we have ever had convicted of something like that.
Just so people understand, correct me if I'm wrong, a SAC of New York would be like just 2 levels below the director?
So inside the bureau, you have special agents, then you have supervisory special agents, then you have assistant special agents in charge, or at headquarters you have unit chiefs, and that's all the way from the GS 10 level when you come in to the GS 15 level. Those are the lower levels or and junior management up to GS 15. Once you reach the section chief level, you hit the senior executive service level. That's basically you have to be confirmed. Those are appointments confirmed by the Senate or Congress, whatever it is. Same
Oh, okay.
level as a senator, same level as generals. So when you hit that senior executive service, you are on a different pay scale. You're differently regarded. You serve at the pleasure of blah blah blahs. And so this individual was a senior executive. He was at that level. God, I see his picture in my mind. I can't believe I'm blanking, but yeah, he was at that level. And he was in charge of counterintelligence in New York.
Yep. Charles McGonigal.
That's it, Charlie McGonigal. Yep, that's him.
Wow, that's pretty light sentence. 15 months, 4 years.
Yeah, interesting. It was actually his unhealthy relationship he had with a mistress that was friends with NYPD that outed him. So it was actually the NYPD, from what I understand, that actually gave him up to the Bureau to finally investigate.
Interesting. All right. Well, there we go. Now we're getting down the path here. Now, circling back around to the forward. Tell me about this character.
Yeah, so this at the forward of the book, again, my team, we did these espionage investigation as well, and we assessed them behaviorally. I ran some. Most of my crew was recruitment operations, but we did espionage investigations. And this investigation we got called in on. So I was a team leader for my team at the time. We came in. I think I remember the field office because again, I got to hide certain things about this for national security purposes. But a field office calls us in on this case. What they needed was I believe it was at the time that they needed an interview strategy to have a dialogue with this guy because apparently he had a large sum of money that he had hidden someplace in the country that we wanted to recover for damages for other victims. And so then I asked
what was he doing to get the money? When you say damages for victims,
that's what so now we're going to go into how we, and so that's my first question. So who is this? What do we have? What's his case? So what had happened was this field office had opened a case because they had gotten wind. It was a referral from the CIA. I believe it was a referral from the CIA that's what the case was, that one of their non-official cover officers, a knock, had gone rogue. From what I understand, he had been let go from the agency years ago, probably 80s, for behaviors that were incongruent with what he should be doing. I think it's like some sort of voucher fraud, like low end stuff. We're talking like minimal like thing, but it was raising red flags. And when you start screwing around with money in the government, they'll just kick you out. And so he had been kicked out of the agency, and people lost track of him. Now, as I understood it, he had a law degree, like from a prestigious school, and so he was a licensed lawyer. But what had happened was they got referred to the bureau when he had gone out because they needed to find this guy because he just disappeared off the map. He was a non-official cover guy, which is deep cover for the CIA. He'd gone off the map, and they needed to track him down. I can't remember what they needed to track him down for. So as they're getting close, they actually identified him operating in a different name in the Southwest, and he was posing as a lawyer because he was using his lawyer background. And what had happened was he was posing as a lawyer, bilking people out of hundreds of thousands of dollars of their money without providing a service. And so the final thing, as we're getting closer, apparently,
so like he was taking like retainers or something and then skating.
Yeah, billing hours that were never served. I mean, he's a con artist, taking people's money without delivering a service. And just as he's about to be discovered, he evaporates again. Matter of fact, the way he evaporated was there was a sad couple. There's details about them to make them even sadder. I can't share them because it'll be a little too identifying. A sad couple he was representing in court. And as we're getting closer, he got wind somehow of us moving closer. He had bought a Ferrari or high-end car. And the last thing the Bureau saw of him or heard of him was his car driving to an airport, getting on a plane, leaving the car at the airport, this high-end, expensive car, and vaporizing again with all the money. So hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, were gone. Couples left in the lurch, and he's vaporized again. And we're like, and so next time and so again, the Bureau's searching, and you're trying to cross-reference behaviors that match over a period of time. And so now they're able to pick him up in another location, and in I can't say the state, but he's in another state, and now he's posing as a fundraiser for a political party, like high end. He's using his skill set as a political operative to do fundraising, and he's able to raise so much money that he's taking pictures with all these high end politicians. We're talking like future president politicians. And again, he's got the cars, he's got the bling, he's got all these things, and he's
When
collecting.
was this? Can you tell me the time
Um,
span?
this was in the thousands, and somewhere. So I retired in 2018, so somewhere between in the mid 2000s, probably.
So potentially his pictures were out there on Facebook and different things like
Oh
that,
yeah, you
or
know these
the
presidents.
social media.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I wouldn't
So
recognize.
he was pretty bold. Is that how you tracked him? I'm saying it was your job
Yeah,
to
yeah.
say, we've got a guy, he disappeared, we know what he looks like and stuff, but we're trying to find people who pop up out of nowhere and see if it could be him. Is that the
So I think,
methodology?
as again, I was at the 30,000 foot level assessing this
Hmm.
one. I think what had happened was the way, if again, I'm just kind of throwing my hat on for this
No,
one.
it's fine.
I think they probably, they had a physical identification of him. They had photos of him in the one location. Then when you have another case pop up in another location, and we're all, and case agents talk, confer, it all goes through FBI headquarters. And if you have what's called an unsub, an unknown subject, you're going to cross-reference multiple things you can to try to identify who this individual was. And I believe the case agents in the one field office probably saw that, hey, that's our guy. And so they're able to put tie these two cases together and start building this profile of this individual. But now, down as a political operative in this new area, he's raking in millions of dollars. And so, and part of what he was doing was, and this is where, when we called in a behavioral team to do an assessment, part of our team is we have people that are experts in the type of investigation. We have people that are experts in the country if it's involved. And then we'll bring in one of our operational psychologists, which was on contract with us. I remember to make sure that our science is solid behind the operational soft skills we're going to employ to do what we do. In other words, we're merging real life experience with science to make sure they collude like this so that we're solid in what we're doing. And I remember we brought in our operational psych for this case, and he's taking a look. He's looking at this background, looking at all these profiles we had of the individual, and he said because we as laymen, saying laymen, I don't have a degree I'm not a licensed clinical psychologist or anything, but he is. That's why he can use terms of art, as we say. He said this guy, without testing, looks to be high on psychopathy. He looks to be a psychopath. And so people love to throw that term around, but here's what it really, really means for us in our investigation, especially when dealing with this individual and coming up with an interview strategy. It means they're empty. They're a pure predator. They use your empathy against you because they have none. There's zero compassion for another human being. They don't get it. It's just not part of their makeup. They are pure wolf, pure predator. They just enjoy the hunt. And so some psychopaths kill because they have no empathy, because that's the rise in adrenaline rush you get. And you have others that steal millions of dollars for the sake of it, just because they can. Because what this one individual, and here's some telltale signs that he used for this assessment. So here's a guy that put on this front. Whether he's a lawyer, whether he's a political operative, he had this front he was using with the right bling, with the watches, Rolex, cars, and everything. But where he lived, nothing. An empty shell. It was like his apartment. It was a crappy little apartment in a crappy part of town. All he had was a VCR and one movie, and the movie was Catch Me If You Can.
Oh,
No kidding. That was the only. So our only behavioral assessment we had on him was this. And so basically, what it showed was he's empty. He's got no personal identification, whatever. As a predator, he took on whatever persona. He was a chameleon. He took on whatever persona he needed to prey, to be a predator taking advantage of prey. And so that's what he is really good at. So our psych identified him as this, which was the greatest challenge, because 99% of the time when we're coming up with interview strategies for an individual, we're using empathy. We're using all the things we're going to do to try to inspire someone to want to share with us. But you can't use that with a psychopath, because the only motivation, as our psych described to us, their only motivation to want to share is their own grandiosity. That's it. It's not complicated. And so we had to strategize, how do we inspire him to share where he's hid this money, so it plays into his sense of self and grandiosity. That's it. Not because it's the right thing to do, not because there's levers of influence on him in any other way. Grandiosity was it. And so, and how we knew this, one of the reports we had was he used to walk around with a huge sum of cash in a bag, in a briefcase, and go into these horrendous dive bars, like biker dive bars, with nothing but, like, we're talking a huge sum of cash in a case, and leave it by the door as he's sitting there pounding drinks, getting drunk, just for the adrenaline rush to see if anyone would pick up his thing and walk out with it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what psychopaths do, just to play, just to get that adrenaline rush. And so that's the case that I used as the example of dark psychology opening up for Lena's great book.
Okay, so now we're bearing the lead. I ask you a couple questions, and I will circle back to it. Well, number one, I wanted to point something out, because you mentioned living in an empty hole of a place, but having like nice cars and stuff. That doesn't always signify a psychopath. In this case, it is a tell, but I do want to know that say that I've learned over time that there are some people who are in politics or other type of offices who, I live in an area called Hampton. Nearby us is Williamsburg. There's a place there called Kings Mill. And very famously, there are people who live in Kings Mill, and they have no furniture, no money, nothing. They just enough so they can have that address to say they live in Kings Mill for the purposes of building a professional identity. Also, there are real estate agents who live in a hovel but drive a Mercedes, because people don't necessarily trust an agent who has a beat up car to show them nice houses. There are some legitimate reasons, or there are some reasons that people do it. They're understandable, I guess I would say,
Sure.
because of psychology of people. And I'm sure he's doing it too. He's using the psychology and the superficial, probably charm, things like that, the nice cars to attract others, etc., in a bad way.
Yeah, so his background, as I described, is not a paintbrush for everyone who lives that way. It was a data point for him as an individual.
Sure.
So it's one more data point to add to multiple data points that our psych used to come up with a profile for him. And because when you look at the behaviors he had externally, and you looked at how he was living internally, there was an incongruence between the two. And so those were the data points we were putting together. But yeah, it's definitely not a broad brush of how people live. Saying you're a psychopath or not based on what's in your house. No. Because,
no.
Because you had the BTK killer, convicted for being a serial killer. He had a very, very normal house with a wife and daughter.
He was unusual, though. He was very unusual.
It is, but then we're looking at, innocent proven guilty, but now we're looking at Rex Heuermann in New York for the Gilgo Beach murders as well. And that's an interesting thing. So it's not an empty shell of a house there either. So there's individuals, again, every individual is different, but there are patterns that do emerge over time.
Well, the Green River Killer also stopped, and he, if I recall, got married and kind of settled down in a weird way. So it's there, but it is rare. But the other data point that you mentioned, and it just stuck out really early, is you mentioned that he got ran out of the CIA because of vouchers or something.
Yeah.
Are a lot of people caught because, I hate to say it, but a criminal mind doesn't give a shit about doing the right thing and is always looking for a shortcut? As an example, for a while when they were cracking down crime in New York City, people were jumping the turnstiles because they're too damn cheap to pay for their toll. They would pull them over, and sure enough, there's a warrant for this, a warrant for that, a warrant for this. Is there often a propensity, or frequently a propensity, of they're just going to cheat? If they can find an angle or whatever, they're just going to do it. So sometimes the small level stuff can tip off to somebody who's a really bad hombre, so to speak?
Yeah. So again, I don't know more details. There was probably more leakage there, but what we're talking about here is leakage. And
Hmm.
this goes to what I do as as a behavior expert is I'm looking for patterns of behavior over time. And because they're extremely predictable. Because if someone does something once, twice, or three times a similar way, the likelihood of them continuing that arc of behavior, it's going to continue exactly the same way unless there's a new outside stimulus that causes a spike and change of behavior. And so in this case, if you have someone willing to do low end voucher fraud, that's most likely not the only thing going sideways, and a behavior of not being, because I again, I'm throwing my own conjecture on it because I didn't know all the details of
Sure.
this thing, but I'm guessing, you know, when it comes to especially non-official cover officers, so these are not this is not the typical case officers that are, under
Hmm.
diplomatic cover as CIA officers oversized. This is a non-official cover guy. This is a guy that is operating under the radar of foreign governments, posing in a commercial capacity, being a businessman, but he's actually a CIA guy. You need to have both. They have to hire someone with higher, edging up towards psychopathy because they got to really take advantage of people and situations, be very innovative problem solvers. And so you're going to edge up there. But you also have to be able to maintain control, because if the agency and organization doesn't have control over their person that's an operative for them, it's completely useless. And so not being able to control their impulse of just a simple voucher thing, I guarantee you that's not the only thing going sideways in their lives. The lack of ability to control an individual like that over the time, it's just going to be problems. And so I can't remember whether he actually quit on his own or was told you better leave, or but it was definitely it was a data point, probably amongst others, that said you are incompatible with this because we know you're going to be a control issue.
You bring up a good point with that about the independent thought, et cetera, that is required. We both know Jack Barsky. I've interviewed him multiple times. I know you have as well. He said something that stuck out to me multiple times, that they planned for every agent to be useless in 10 years. That
Mhm.
because of independent thought and the patterns that you described, that there's a 10-year lifespan before they just were going to go rogue, go off on their own, or just fit in completely, including him.
Right.
Because at about the 10-year mark, he was like, you know what, I don't want to do this. I'm going to go do my own thing. I kind of like what I'm doing and moving on. So that's an interesting parallel. And I thought that the having an actual date of expiration like he did is fascinating.
Yeah, and I don't think it's probably a hard date, but like inside the bureau, if you're doing undercover work, you have the checkup from the neck up. They say every 6 months to
Mhm.
kind of establish a baseline at the beginning of your operation of being undercover to see if you're maintaining or if there's a spike. If there starts to be a spike out of your norm, that's the time to say it's a little too much. And so, from the KGB's optic back then, they thought it to be roughly 10 years, which in Jack's case is roughly that, because you acclimatize. If you're going to be deep cover, you're going to start acclimatize and become normalized in a new environment you're in. Interesting thing with Jack, though, and cases like his, so we can relate it to this one as well, he displayed and inspired the people that he worked for inside the KGB to trust him. And there's one thing that he did very, very well that ingratiated him to his handlers, that let him operate at a much higher level as a deep undercover guy than most people I've ever seen. I've worked, as we've talked about, and debriefed and worked with defectors that were deep cover guys like him. And he had a higher level of autonomy and operational tempo than I've seen before. And that's because he inspired his handlers to trust him at a level I hadn't seen before. And this is how he would dime himself out. He didn't
Mm.
hide when he did something wrong or stupid, and he owned it. And he was transparent. In other words, I have these three behaviors of trust, which are critical if you're going to have a healthy relationship with someone of trust. That is, you have to have open, honest communication, you have to have transparency, and you have to have vulnerability. And vulnerability is really the key crux one, because people are afraid to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is saying that I am very transparent with what my skill set isn't. And I'm going to
Mm.
have the courage to share with you what it's not. Because when I do that for you, Eric, I'm empowering you with choice to allow you to feel safe with me. Because if I'm willing to share with you what I'm doing wrong, then you can guarantee that I'm sharing everything with you. So you're going to feel safe. So I'm giving you situational awareness so you feel safe in making decisions about me and everything that's going on. So that's what Jack did very well. And that's what higher level operatives are doing when they're testing trust in someone deep cover in these operations. They're testing open and honest communication, transparency, and vulnerability. Are they being open and honest to allow their handlers to feel safe to operate them? And that's what Jack was doing until he
Or a
wasn't.
psychopath could also do that, but to a degree, like allow certain vulnerabilities to show, and meanwhile cover an intention, which may bring us back to our subject at hand. So, how did you go about, or what did you recommend that they use to get him to dime himself or expose himself?
So they had arrested him because they knew it was him. And we were just trying to strategize him giving basically confessing to everything, including things he had hidden and things like that. And so I remember when we're strategizing as a team how to conduct this interview, we kept trying to use the typical levers of influence that we'll do is like we'll talk about rationalizations where we help people rationalize their behavior, a way to, in other words, help them feel like a victim, like the society victimized you, so
Sure.
you're righteous. You use projections, so you help them project the blame onto someone else. You just were
Mm.
just a fall guy for it, or you help minimize. Hey, you took millions, but it could have been billions you took in from someone else. So work with us, and we can help mitigate this thing. You're going to use what we call those rationalizations, projections, and minimizers, form that trust bond. And every time we kept going to that, our psych kept reminding us, psychopaths don't care. It won't work. All you have to do is go on grandiosity. And so, in other words, what we were doing was, since we knew he maybe idolized Frank Abagnale, as we've mentioned before, and because he got away with bilking people out of billions of dollars for himself and no gain for someone else. That's a true indicator. Is like, are you doing this? Are you some social justice warrior, or doing it for yourself,
Sure.
pure self? And so all we had to do was his sense of grandiosity was our scheme was to have the case agent say, hey, you're a good, but you're not that good. This guy's better.
Mm.
So it is laying down the gauntlet to say, now you kind of suck. You could have been better. Prove you're better than him. That's the only strategy. That sense of grandiosity. In other words, lay down the gauntlet that, hey, you say you're great, you're going to jail anyway. But if you want to have that kind of notoriety that you think you deserve, we don't think you're it. So it's literally just challenging him, saying that you suck.
You're a small timer.
Yeah, you think
Whatever.
you're right. Because even this guy, even Frank Abagnale, he was so good he actually trains the FBI now. You could never do that because you suck, unless you can prove to me you're not.
And it worked.
I can't say.
Oh.
Not my case.
Oh.
But when you're looking at human behavior, if anything was going to work, that was it.
Wow. I wanted to know why we've never heard of this guy, but anyway.
I think so. Because I don't know the true name. So one of the things they do when we're coming in for these close held cases, they hide a lot of details from us as well, so that they can't be outed. But I do know this case. He was convicted and sentenced and all that. So I know the case is out there. If I could direct you to it, I would. But I don't know. That's how compartmentalized it was. So it's a case that got adjudicated and all that, so it's not like he's out there still doing stuff, and I guarantee you those details are in some court case someplace. But yeah, it was fascinating because it was my first experience doing a deeper dive on how to interview a psychopath, the challenges, and actually how much more simpler it is because there's less to work with. And so when I do a lot of true crime commentary, it's easier to see and recognize if we're starting, because again, it's not like someone's a psychopath or not a psychopath. It's like anything. It's a spectrum. And when you start edging up towards a higher level, they become a little easier to predict because there's less input you need. You just got to think of, you're dealing with a shark, you're dealing with a wolf that just does things out of pure instinct for self glory, for the adrenaline rush, for the things in life emotionally that they don't get anywhere else. Brian Coberger is a great example, who's now, admitting today as a recording that he did it. So he's pleading guilty, and this is the guy that killed 4 students in Idaho. And here's a guy that had mental issues growing up, that was constantly seeking some sort of stimulus, and as according to his own words, that he was just never getting. So it elevates to a level of, I need to do something to get this kind of stimulation. So
He
that's,
was he is a weird dude.
yeah,
Very weird. Like you said, troubles growing up. Well, let's look into that for a second. I'm
yeah,
guessing you read up on him a little bit.
I've
I'm
heard the case a
interviewing
lot.
Howard Blum coming up.
Yeah.
Um,
God bless
and it,
Howard Blum. He did a great job with the Into the Night book. Very good book.
yes,
Yeah.
and
So
that was very illuminating. I had no idea that he was a heroin addict, and I would say a food addict, or he hid problems in food.
that's Coburger, not Howard Bloom. Yes.
Sorry. Howard Bloom's just an author. I mean, a noted author, Pulitzer
Very
Prize
well.
nominee, but yeah, no. All anything that can be inferred as negative right now is Brian Koberger, and
Yes.
he deserves it. But
100%.
yes, so a heroin addict, a food addict, grossly obese, but then suddenly became vegan, dropped this weight extensively, then got a surgery. There's a very specific name, cutting off this massive amount of loose skin. Um, Gets involved in criminal justice programs. And that was a theory I was talking to Robin about offline, that I don't find it surprising that there may be people who are in the deep cover operations of the CIA, whatever, who may sometimes display tendencies, or there may be people with those tendencies trying to get into that field. I don't want to put a bad brush on
Sure.
everybody, but it's going to be attractive to them. The same way it seems that Brian Koberger got into criminal justice program, was a savant at it. Essentially, the instructor said that he was top of his game. He had courses with I forgot her name, but one of the top true crime, Kathleen Ramsland or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. His professor. Yep.
Top notch, and she said
Yep.
he was top notch. And I think even set up a communication to bring it full circle with said Dennis Rader, aka BTK
Yep.
Killer, because she did, either she did or he did as well. I don't know. Somehow it was tied together, but very, very weird guy. Early plug. Interview coming up. I think you guys might want to check out.
100% you should, because Howard Bloom did a great one. I'm on another podcast on true crime as well, and we've call it riffing off of Howard Bloom's content with some of the stuff he came up with, because he had insights from doing so many good interviews of people surrounding Koberger, that were able to get more data points to assess and look at. But yeah, 100%, great author. He did a really good deep dive on Coburg and all the situations surrounding it and the people surrounding it. So hats off to him. I think he played a big part in helping people understand what was going on.
All right. So now circling back to you, and these cases, do you have another person that you've studied over time that is similar?
To which the CIA operative gone bad?
Yes.
So it's interesting, so kind of we'll go back to what I was saying earlier, doing about 100 or so assessments a year. It gave me an optic of seeing a broad breadth of things, and see if there's trends or not trends, because every group and organization always have to justify your existence to your bean counters above
Mhm.
you to say why you should or shouldn't have funding. And so I actually did a deeper dive on, that's where I come up with the numbers of how many espionage investigations we did versus recruitment operations, different countries we worked. And so when I looked at those espionage investigations, they're really all over the board with backgrounds. You had a lot of clear defense contractors that were obviously involved because they had access to information, because you need
Sure.
people with access to information in order to be in that kind of position. So you had military, you had clear defense contractors. They were kind of the main staple of espionage investigations. And then the internal bureau ones typically didn't get referred to us, like the Robert Hansens, just because they're so close held internally. There's a whole separate unit inside the bureau that does those. So I don't know the numbers of those. But the thing that was striking to me, the only small, and I'll call it a small blip in the patterns because they were random dots all over the place for types of people that are basically insider threats, was that I never had one company that had, like Boeing didn't have like a predominant number versus Northrop Grumman or anything. It's really, there was no rhyme or reason except the CIA's deep cover knocks. They popped up a few times with people that gone bad. Kind of going to the point you're making a minute ago, was in order to do that kind of work, which is different than my work. First of all, I have, my job is to recruit confident human sources and intelligence officers from a foreign country without a reason why. Like, I don't have a lever of influence over them. They 99.9% of the time they haven't committed a crime, not doing anything wrong, except they're serving their own country. I mean, so how do you have to use deep empathy and active, you have to be a very empathetic person to inspire someone to have a conversation with you, to be someone that's going to solve a critical life challenge in their life and trust you with their lives. It's a different skill set than from a CIA deep cover operative who's got to manipulate someone into giving them information because you need a turnaround time like this. So the people they're going to be hiring for that position have to be edging up towards psychopathy because you have to be much more comfortable with manipulation, subterfuge, and taking advantage of another human being. I'm not comfortable with that. So it's a skill set I don't have. And if I did utilize it, it's make me extremely uncomfortable. So they have to bring someone in and hire people that are more comfortable with that kind of human behavior, which is going to edge up on a scale a little bit more towards that psychopathy. So, but they have to be, so that's why they do a lot of profile, a lot of background tests and things like that, so that you have the skill set, but you actually have enough empathy to be loyal to the country. So there's a lot of things that come into play there.
Do you ever run honeypot operations?
Bureau does not do that.
Okay. I'm just wondering, like you said, you have to watch out, you have to get other people. I mean, sometimes temptation is a way to draw them out, right? An
So
operation where you
I
see,
bet.
hey, does this do these normal agents? If they turn it down, hey, they're good to go. Nothing happened. No muss, no fuss.
So honeypot operations are an interesting. It's an interesting discussion. I was part of the discussion multiple times inside the bureau when both when I was running the team where a case agent wanted to run a honeypot operation, or in my own investigations where he thought this might be a lever of influence to inspire a bad guy to have a conversation with us. I mean, I had one of the intelligence officers I was working in New York. I actually had video footage of him cheating on his wife. And his internet searches were anything but anything he'd be proud of. And I strategized, hey, how to have a conversation with him, saying, hey, we have some, I and entice. Boy, I actually ran a honeypot operation. In a way, um, this guy was actually on an online dating site, and I knew based on his internet searches what kind of women he liked, the ages, and all that. And so I created an online profile on this dating site. And this is early 90s or mid 90s. Oh, I came in the bureau 97, so really late 90s, early 2000s. I created a profile of an individual I knew he would like, and it was me. and so basically I catfished him, and he bit. But when it came down to the actual meeting where I'm actually going to, be me and just see if I can have a conversation with him. So it wasn't a true honeypot. It was a honeypot to the point where I'm going to have a conversation with him about his activities to see if he want. But you see
It
how
sounded like you did a Chris Hansen.
yeah, but you see how bad that is though,
Did
because
you show up with pizza? No, sorry.
I was about to, and actually, I had another case agent, a female, lined up to actually be the female that lines up with him, even though I was the one dialoguing with him. So it was really going to be a bait and switch. But what had happened was he actually wound up having an affair with another employee at the embassy, so he chose her instead of me. So I felt like but but I remember, but it was interesting because I actually called in the behavioral team on this. It's actually one of the cases I used to actually get me on the team because it would have failed. It completely would have failed because I was using a lever of manipulation, and I was starting a relationship off on a fraud.
So an entrapment, in a
Yeah,
sense.
they don't work. You might have
Hmm.
a short-term gain. Best way is related to business. You can, Chris Voss, great book, Never Split the Difference. Amazing
I've talked to him.
interview,
Yeah.
amazing Christ, and amazing in the boardroom. People often ask me, so Robin, where does your stuff with Chris Voss how do they how do they link together? I said, I pick up where Chris Voss leaves off, because Chris's content is great for the boardroom to get that buy-in, to get that yes. I mean, I've never read anything better than his stuff. And he trained our team when I first came on. He's been doing it that long. When I came on the team in 2001, 2002, he came in for 3 days to train us on that stuff because he's already doing it. I mean, he's got reps. But what I did was I had to recruit someone for repeat business. And so I pick up where he leaves off. And so
he's the first date and you're courting?
yeah, I'm going for the marriage. He's going for a one night stand, or maybe two. Extremely effective, but it needs to go someplace from there. So I did recruitment operations. And so if I was going to utilize that skill set to get you to say yes, if I get you to say yes on a fraud or a lie or a deception or manipulation, the chances of you saying yes tomorrow are much less. Or the information you're going to give is just going to be to placate me and get me out the door. I want you to show up to our next meeting excited to see me, wanting to please, and giving me more than I ask for. In order to do that, it's got to be a real healthy, strong relationship of trust. And so those are the things I learned by these operations of what worked and what didn't work. As people want to assess the James Bond stuff, is no. And all that manipulation, as I call the hooky spooky spy stuff, it works in the short term for the transactional relationship. But if you're going to go for the long term intelligence, it's going to fail, guaranteed. I know it fails because I've done it. I did it for 22 years. I know what works and doesn't work.
Well, that's actually an excellent point to wrap up on. I want to have you back to talk about your involvement in the ghost stories Anna Chapman case.
Yeah.
And hopefully we can continue the conversation with that. Now, I know you're not the only person involved. Yep. You described yourself as a spoke in the wheel, like that there's different spokes holding up the case. But it'll be fascinating to learn about the case from you overall, and also what your role was in that.
Sure.
And for now, though, I'm going to put some links to Robin's books, plural, in the description. The only book I talked about was Lena Cisco, but Robin has multiple books, and you definitely want to check them out. They're all about building empathy, building trust with others, and a lot of good value in just relationships as a whole. So it's not just a business relationship, it's people, just getting on with people from what I've read. So Robin, thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric. As always, great times.